Welcome to the Research for Social Change Lab podcast. For our first series, we will be presenting panel talks and conversations from our symposium on housing and homelessness in Peterborough. In 1976, the Canadian government committed to ensuring the rights of Canadians to housing, and recommitted to this right in 2017 with the National Housing Strategy, and again in 2019 with the National Housing Strategy Act. With this background in mind, this panel discusses how using grassroots organizing and policy advocacy reshapes power dynamics away from earning rights through market participation to mobilizing and actualizing the right to housing. The first presentation, featuring Irene Suvillaga from Peterborough ACORN and Nico Koyanagi, a coordinator at OPIRG Peterborough, discussed the housing crisis in the context of Canada as a neoliberal settler colonial capitalist society. They describe how the current rental regime in Ontario favors developers and landlords at the expense of those living in precarious situations. They argue that we can resist this financialization of the housing market through generating collective power and use ACORN, the Association of Community Reform Now, as an example of how to mobilize this power to reassert our rights to housing. The second presentation discusses the role basic income plays in actualizing our rights to housing and security. Speakers Elisha, Rubacha, and Joëlle Fauvreau from the Basic Income Peterborough Network bring the conversation back to the rights our government has committed us to. They argue that basic income, the idea that everybody deserves an income, is one method of actualizing these rights. They discuss the distinct types of basic income and how basic income can help grow our democracy.
This is the Realizing Rights to Housing and an Adequate Standard of Living session. And before we start the presentations, I just want to give a broad overview of what the right to housing is. I'm not sure if it's come up in any of the other sessions that you've been to, so I wanted to just provide an overview. The United Nations provides a broad definition of the right to housing as the right to live somewhere in security, peace, and dignity. But not only must a place to live exist for each person, but it must be safe, accessible, and appropriate to the person. The right includes the entitlements to equal and non-discriminatory access to adequate housing. And it also includes recognizing and mobilizing the agency of people who best understand their own circumstances of homelessness and housing insecurity by recognizing them as rights holders and active subjects. In 1976, Canada committed to the right to housing through the International Convention on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. It renewed this commitment through the National Housing Strategy in 2017 and the National Housing Strategy Act in 2019. The federal government commits to a right to housing approach grounded in non-discrimination, inclusion, participation, and accountability. However, it also commits to the continued progressive realization of the right to adequate housing through public policy and programs, rather than the legal enforcement of a right which individuals can claim through the court system. Although the government will convene review panels to hear cases from communities or groups experiencing systemic infringements on the right to housing, the National Housing Strategy sets out no legal remedy for individuals living with homelessness. The following two presentations consider how using grassroots organizing and policy advocacy can reshape power dynamics and shift focus away from having to earn rights in a market economy to mobilize not only the right to housing, but a right to living. So first up, we have the power of tenant union organizing, grassroots advocacy for housing justice, with Nico and Irene. So Nico Koyanagi.
That's okay.
Sorry. I meant to check with you earlier.
You got it the second time.
Nico is a mixed-race Japanese-Canadian who lives in Nokojiwanong on Michisage-Nishinabeg territory. She is a community organizer, a facilitator, a mediator, and peer supporter who centers connection and healing in all her work. She holds an MSW from York University and is the coordinator of OPIRG Peterborough and a member of Peterborough Nokojiwanong ACORN. She also volunteers with various local organizations and is an active member in the Japanese-Canadian community. And Irene Suvillaga is a Salvadoran currently residing in Nogo-Jiwanang, Peterborough. She holds a degree in international development and political studies from Trent University and is pursuing a career as an investigative journalist. As an active member of Nogo-Jiwanang, ACORN, and Peterborough Arts Collective, Irene is committed to community organizing and creating art. She currently serves as an intern on the Borgen Project, a nonprofit organization devoted to fighting global poverty. So welcome.
Thank you so much. All right. I'm going to stand at the podium. Is this on? Yeah, there's the button. You got it, right? Okay. Awesome. Thank you so much, Marianne, for that introduction. And hello, everyone. It's so great to be here with you all today. It's been such a pleasure to be part of this weekend. And yeah, it's definitely sitting heavily with me as well, just what we've been discussing and some of the comments that were brought forward today, too, about the lack of lived experience in these spaces, and I think also the lack of diversity in these spaces. So I just wanted to recall those and also know that we are working towards creating inclusive spaces, and just grateful that we're all here today. So I also just want to begin, even though it was mentioned at the beginning of the sessions yesterday, I just want to acknowledge that we're on Michisagig Nishnabeg territory here in Nogo-Jiwanang. Especially because we're talking about a colonial concept of housing which hinges on land ownership, I think it's really important to acknowledge that for those of us who are settlers in the room, we're here occupying Indigenous territory and have imposed these ways of being on this land. So this to me means that we have a responsibility to listen to Indigenous peoples about how to care for the land, and also about how to foster good relationships with the land. So I just want to offer a lot of gratitude to Michisagig Nishnabegs for their teachings and also for their care and defense of the land. And I hope that our work here together moves us towards a decolonized community in which everyone is entitled to all basic human necessities, including the right to housing. And I also just want to acknowledge that as Canadians, we're also complicit in Israel's settler colonial project that is currently violently displacing Gazans from their homelands and also destroying their homes. And so I know we spoke about grief yesterday, and also Tamer brought it up this morning, that all of these struggles are connected. And so I just wanted to bring that into the space as well. So again, I already got a lovely introduction, but you can call me Nico. I use she or they pronouns, and I grew up here in Nogo-Jiwanang, and I'm also currently the coordinator at OPIRG Peterborough. So if you don't know, hi Jackie, welcome. If you don't know about OPIRG Peterborough, we're an organization that kind of sprung up in the 70s across the nation, across Turtle Island actually, as part of student movements in the 70s working to engage the community on a variety of social and environmental justice issues. And we host an annual disorientation week every year where we try to introduce new students and also community members to different community organizations, student groups, and we held a tenants' right workshop with the Community Legal Center, Peterborough Community Legal Center, and Irene was there as well, and we were kind of asking the facilitator what would be the most powerful thing that we could do to challenge some of these systems, and she mentioned national tenants unions, and so that kind of sparked this for us in terms of trying to address systemic change and growing a tenants union here in Nogo-Jiwanang. Just feel really honored. I think we're definitely on a learning journey with this as well, so I feel very humbled to be in a room with folks with so much experience.
Yeah, well, hi, my name's Irene. As Mary told you guys, I want to acknowledge that I'm an uninvited guest in this land. I use she, her pronouns, and I am from El Salvador, Central America. And I am here today as a member of ACORN's first Nogo-Jiwanang Peterborough chapter. And for those who are not familiar with ACORN, it is a national multi-issue membership-based tenancy union for low and moderate income people. And just like Nico, I'm very honored to be here today and speak a little bit more about this initiative.
Awesome. So here's the beautiful land. Just to give you kind of an overview, we're going to talk about how we're understanding the housing crisis in Canada in the larger context of settler colonialism and neoliberal capitalism, which I think we've been discussing so far in this symposium as well. And then we'll discuss how building collective power through tenants' unions can serve to resist these powerful structures. So just to touch on it again, as we all know, this is a settler colonial state, so we think it's a really important starting point that I feel like I can't emphasize enough, that this land, was previously governed by a multitude of indigenous legal systems, which were eventually violently replaced with settler law, which was deemed to be the only acceptable form of justice. And I think that, something that came up yesterday too is like, we don't actually have to accept this. And so this conception of justice is intrinsically connected to the property claims of the settler colonial state and has historically been used to criminalize Indigenous peoples. And these laws have also been used throughout history to justify the violent removal of Indigenous peoples from their lands, which also continues today. While Indigenous peoples are also continuing to resist this. They're continuing to assert their rights to the land, as we see out in Wet'suwet'en territory, and even in Allen Gardens in Takaranto, where there's now a designated sacred fire site. And yesterday we spoke about the financialization of housing, which Irene will expand on in a moment, but I just felt that it was really important to make this connection between today's current neoliberal housing landscape and this ongoing colonial rationale of land theft and white supremacy that is used to exploit people and the land to accumulate wealth for those at the top of the racial and class hierarchy.
Yeah, thank you, Nico. I'm going to change the slide. So though I'm not a scholar or an economist, I wanted to briefly talk about neoliberalism because I think it can really help us understand the housing crisis not just as a result of market forces or individual actions, but as a reality deeply intertwined with the legacy of colonialism and a capitalist structure developed through colonial networks of commodities, peoples, ideas, practices, which must be unlearned and challenged. So neoliberalism has been the underpinning ideology of Western governments since the 80s. With an emphasis of deregulation, privatization, and the supremacy of free market, neoliberalism's ideology encourages the hoarding of wealth by redefining people as consumers, encouraging competition, and punishing inefficiency. In this vein, the neoliberal doctrine perpetuates the myth that wealth accumulation is solely a result of hard work and merit, while ignoring systemic barriers and inequalities that perpetuate these. So this narrative has created the illusion of a natural hierarchy, justifying the hoarding of real estate by wealthy, but also blaming the individual for their housing insecurity instead of an inherently flawed system. So the promise of a utopian capitalist society and the benevolence of the invisible hand, as so famously stated by Adam Smith, relies on the accumulation of wealth by a few and thereby the exploitation of a poor majority. So I wanted to talk a little bit about Ontario's rental regime. In Canada, the consequences of a neoliberal housing policies are pretty stark. Skyrocketing house prices despite stagnant wages and a lack of affordable rental options have pushed countless Canadians, particularly marginalized and low-income communities, into precarious living conditions. Over the past decade, there has been a growth in renters, which was twice the size of that of owners in Canada. According to a 2021 census, roughly 1/3 of Canadians rent. And this number is higher in urban centers such as Toronto and Vancouver. And within Canada, Indigenous peoples are 8 times more likely to become homeless and account for 10 to over 80%, depending on where you are, of the homeless population than non-Indigenous individuals. So in Ontario, the power dynamics put in place to disregard housing as a fundamental right has been a work in progress project for over 40 years. Among other things, this has been the result of the erosion of Rent Control Act in 1998 by the Progressive Conservative government, and the passing of a Tenant Protection Act that involved a number of landlord-friendly policies. Has also been a result of major changes made to the Tenant Protection Act in order to incentivize the creation of new housing for the benefit of landlords and developers. And last but not least, the creation of financialized landlords in Ontario in the 90s, which was simultaneous to the government's halt on building affordable rental stock, the decline of vacancy rates, and the erosion of rent control laws. To give an example of their dominant stance of financialized landlords in the housing system, in 1996, financialized landlords owned none of the rental suites in Canada. And this has drastically changed since by the end of 2019, before the pandemic, financialized landlords own more than 194,000 rental units, demonstrating an extreme concentration of ownership among big landlords. We can also see this process in our hometown, as demonstrated by the data shown in this slide. And what I'm trying to show you is that in the last decades, the erosion of tenant protections, the incentivization of landlord-friendly policies, and the rise of financialized landlords exemplify how neoliberalism has shaped much of Ontario's modern housing landscape. By increasing the commodification of housing, the interests of profit-driven developers and investors have been prioritized, exacerbating inequality and entrenching unequal power dynamics that perpetuate housing insecurity for vulnerable groups. The financialization of housing under a colonial capitalist system has stripped shelter and the provision of it from being understood and, more importantly, treated as a human right.
Yes, so this brings us to why we're here today. So our goal is to, show that renters and people who are unhoused are, first of all, not alone in this struggle, that the inability to find adequate or affordable housing is not a personal failure, but it's a systemic one. And we're also here to offer a means of fighting for long-term systemic change, and also to provide relief in the short term as people navigate and fight for their rights in our current system. So we think it's really important to recognize that these aren't necessarily opposing goals, the short game and the long game, but that they're different approaches and they actually need to go hand in hand. And I think that was touched on this morning as well. So our solution is collective power and building grassroots mobilization and reasserting our rights to safe, affordable, and adequate housing. So collective power is when we come together to join forces and we can cooperate based on our shared values and goals and pool our resources and energy towards spearheading change. So when we work as a group, we become stronger and more influential. Collective power allows us to create commonality, encourages diversity, solidarity, and mutual empowerment. It also births an alignment of goals that tend to be hampered by our individualistic society and values. So when we think about power in the realm of politics, we as ACORN believe that there are two main forms of influence. Is that on? Oh, no. Either you have money or you have people. So we may not have money, but we do have numbers, and we need to come together in order to build our power. So we can't rely on systems and structures that are currently in place because they do not address the root of the problem or even address the needs of people, and in particular tenants or folks who are unhoused. And these systems, as we've discussed, are exactly in place to serve those in positions of power. So landlords and those who can afford to purchase housing. Rather than serving to support people, these systems offer just an inaccessible bureaucratic nightmare for tenants and service providers. So this unreliability and inefficiency have also led to widespread discontent, perpetuating a state of indifference and ingraining a sense of alienation based on a feeling that our current political system just does not work for us. So organizing, self-organizing is not easy. The principal goal of organizing and coming together is to generate sustainable power So in order to influence key decision makers on a range of issues over time. So as organizers, we work with and towards developing new leaders, building power, and demanding changes through campaigns, and also more importantly, winning campaigns. So by taking matters into our own hands through peaceful organization and direct action, we're able to pressure politicians, corporations, landlords, on specific issues that not only builds community empowerment, but also individual empowerment as well. So together we can remind each other of the inherent power that lies in our voice, our presence, and we can stand up for our rights and also ensure that people are able to keep their housing and keep their access to safe housing.
And so this is why today we are also introducing you to ACORN and our tenant union chapter here in Peterborough, Nagojewanang.
Yeah, shout out to Jackie.
Yeah, Jackie is one of our members as well. And I want to start by saying that ACORN stands for Association of Community Organizations for Reform Now. And like as I mentioned before, it is a multi-issue membership-based community union of low and moderate income people. With over 160,000 members organized across 11 cities throughout Canada, ACORN has a long and deep history of organizing in low and moderate income neighborhoods, fighting and winning changes through a variety of means and actions. So, such actions include door knocking and petitioning, but more importantly, peaceful direct action, which includes tenants' defense. Tenants' defense means that if a landlord is trying to legally evict a tenant or refusing to maintain the safety of a unit, we can rally around them in support. But we also include campaigning on different issues, both locally, provincially, and federally, and also peaceful protesting. So our solution, So through these actions, ACORN has won several important victories since 2004, such as payday lending legislation, raises in minimum wage, housing rights bylaws across the country, affordable internet programs, disability rights, and more. As a multi-issue organization, ACORN campaigns at the national, provincial, and municipal levels, targeting corporate and government identified issues. One of our most recent examples of ACORN's municipal power was demonstrated by Hamilton ACORN chapter, who after 5 years of effort and several motions passed, they led the creation of a strong anti-renoviction bylaw earlier this year. As mentioned before, other of ACORN's successes include cutting the criminal interests rate in half, a 10th-month dollar program, internet programs, millions of dollars raised for affordable housing, stricter rules for problem landlords, and stopping our members' evictions and major rent increases. Yeah.
Yes, so Nagojewanang ACORN chapter is still in its initial phases. So currently we're just focusing on creating our presence in the community, letting individuals know us, know that we exist, building our power, and really building from the ground up. So we do have a handful of dedicated members who have joined our bi-weekly meetings and accompanied us in doing different outreach, including door knocking and petitioning for full rent control. So this is Irene. This past Wednesday, we handed a letter to MPP Dave Smith to demand 3 things. First of all, full rent control, so that applies to all buildings and includes vacancy control, so a measure that would cap rent increases after a tenant moves out. As was discussed in one of the sessions yesterday, landlords are doing everything they can to get people out of their units so that they can double and sometimes even triple the cost of rent. The second demand was banning AGIs, or above the guideline increases in rent, that allow landlords to effectively avoid rent control laws. And third, landlord and tenant board reform. So as of right now, the landlord-tenant board is basically just an eviction factory that prioritizes landlord applications over tenant applications. So Yeah, we're currently just like a working group of OPIRG Peterborough, but we are seeking full members who are committed to direct action and progressive change, and who can really help to take it off the ground and build the power that we need. So once we do have 10 full members, we will officially become an ACORN chapter, and we'll also be invited to influence provincial and federal ACORN campaigns. So we also recently held a tenants' rights workshop with Laura Greenwood from CCRC, and we're just really looking forward to more opportunities to engage with the community. So if you are a tenant, or if you work with tenants who may be looking for a group of people who are interested in standing up for our rights together, please send them our way. And yeah, we do have full rent control petitions with us that you're invited to sign. We'll keep you informed about upcoming actions, and we also have some flyers about our current campaign. So that's us for now. Thank you so much.
Next meeting that people can join accessibly.
Yeah, thanks for the call to action. Sunday, 3 to 5 p.m. We will have our next meeting.
At Sadler House.
Yes, yeah, it's Sadler House.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Nico and Irene, that was amazing and very inspiring, and to be looking at the power of the collective and the power that people can have when they come together. Our next presentation is on basic income and the right to living by Elisha Rubacha and Joëlle Fauvreau. Elisha is the Community Impact Officer at United Way Peterborough and District, and a member of Basic Income Peterborough Network. Through her previous role at Nourish and through her work at in the arts community, both independently and as a former board member of the Electric City Culture Council, she has been a staunch advocate for a basic income guarantee for many years. She was involved in developing Ontario Basic Income Network's the case for basic income for work, as well as the public letter from the arts community for a basic income guarantee. And she delivered a testimony during the Media Arts Network of Ontario Basic Income, an Artists Commission event. Elisha is driven by her own lived experience of accessing social assistance in the past, as well as her professional work with people living in poverty. She is a firm believer in the importance of upstream system change and evidence-based approaches to not just mitigating, but ending poverty. And Joëlle is a co-founder and member of Basic Income Peterborough Network and an anti-poverty and food security activist for years. For years, they had the opportunity to work with Elisha in working on how to support people living with people with lived experience in becoming civic leaders. So, welcome.
Hi, everyone. It's good to be here. Sure. So yeah, basic income and the right to living.
So, as Marianne said, my name is Joëlle. My pronouns are they, them. And as a settler on this land, originally from Western France, I always ask myself, how do I create right relationships with the people of this land through my life, through my work, and through my activism. And the work that I do with basic income is one avenue that I try to create those right relationships. I think, this morning's panel, the conversation just now, has been focusing on housing. And we're going to take a slightly different angle. As Marianne mentioned, the bulk of the work I've done comes from food security work. And I've always said housing is a food issue. Because you can see that how much people put all their income in housing and then have nothing left for food. So that's part of the reason why I've been really keen on trying to think about what could make a difference around food insecurity. And I also happen to originally have been trained as a historian. So I often think about the past and what is the past telling us about making sense of the present or learning in terms of, impacting the future. So one thing that I've been thinking a lot about lately is like 80 years ago. I know that seems like so long, but 80 years ago we were just at the end of the Second World War. And so many countries had been impacted, so many people had been killed. People felt never again. And they felt we really need to rethink the international order, because at the time we had a society of nations that really completely failed the world, and said, we really need to rethink how we're going to be in the world. And so we started to see a change, like for instance in 1948, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights.
So I will read that to you just because I know slides are not always accessible. The Article 25(1) of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights reads, "Everyone has the right to a standard of living adequate for the health and well-being of himself," forgive the pronouns here, "and of his family, including food, clothing, housing, and medical care, and necessary social services, and the right to security in the event of unemployment, sickness, disability, widowhood, old age, or other lack of livelihood in circumstances beyond his control."
So yeah, the language is definitely dated, but you can see that, all right, there's a thinking, we need to do things differently. And so there's this idea of human rights is really something we need to explore and think about. And so out of that came some new covenants. And one that was mentioned came out in 1976. It was mentioned earlier. And so it was the idea that, again, to make sure never again, we are going to be enshrining the idea of housing, food as a human right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the right to an adequate standard of living was recognized as a human right when the United Nations adopted the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948. Since then, this right has been recognized by Canada when it signed and ratified other human rights treaties, including the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights in 1976. Canadian governments have promised the United Nations that they will protect and ensure this human right.
So what it said during that covenant was the state parties to the present covenant recognize the right of everyone to an adequate standard of living, again, for himself and his family, including adequate food, clothing, and housing, and to the continuous improvement of living conditions. And then it said, the states parties will take appropriate steps to ensure the realization of this right, recognizing to this effect the essential importance of international cooperation based on free consent. But they stated, and Canada endorsed this covenant, stating that the government was going to take action to actualize those rights, which is really interesting because around food insecurity, we've often debated what does it make that we have this right to food, because we just don't seem to actualize it. So we have those rights, but how do we bring them into being? And that is why the idea of basic income comes in, because actually I believe that it is really a key tool, a key mechanism to actualize those rights.
So I just want to kind of note this language of earning a living. We have this idea kind of embedded, and it's even embedded in the human right we just saw, where it says, or other lack of livelihood in circumstances beyond his control. So like even in the human right, we're kind of saying like, okay, but only if, you didn't mess up. It has to be circumstances beyond your control. So like, what is this expectation that we have say about how we think of life and this like right to living? And so I pulled this tweet, which I think is great and also disturbing. The idea of having to earn a living implies that by default, you don't actually deserve to be alive. So I find that kind of haunting, but I think it's representative of the situation we're in. It's informed our policies, this idea, and on an individual level, it informs our judgments of others as well. And I think we're all very familiar with that sense of judgment that you see. And this is often the argument against a basic income or against social assistance. People they're not working hard enough, they don't deserve it. And so that brings me to this. This is the kind of messaging we receive all the time, that it tells us we need to work harder. If we aren't succeeding financially, it's our own fault. It's because we haven't worked hard enough. And that's so ingrained in us that we also have this idea that if you do work hard enough, that will pay off. But we know that that's not always true. And going back to the food insecurity piece, we know that there's no guarantee that a job is going to be enough to actually be able to afford rent and food. There was a time when jobs supported a decent quality of life, but we've moved away from that with the rise of precarious work and the gig economy. Again, I'm sure you're all too familiar with those things. So I pulled this is one of my favorite statistics from Proof. So over 60% of food insecure households are reliant on wages, salaries, or self-employment as their main source of income. So because food insecurity is such a sensitive measure of poverty, this statistic really illustrates that working people can no longer earn a living, regardless of how hard they may work.
And Elisha mentioned Proof. Proof is is made up of a team of researchers at the University of Toronto, and they've been, for the past over 10 years, they've been doing a lot of research around food insecurity and looking at who is and what are we seeing. And the previous presentation mentioned neoliberalism, and it's very interesting to remember that 1981 is the first year, the first Canadian food bank was established in Edmonton. And then it completely mushroomed from that. So you can see that dates, align, and that some significant changes are happening starting in the early 80s. And then, this stat that shows how many of a lot of the understanding we had of the world actually is not what's happening. Mm-hmm. And so what we are seeing, and actually Elisha started to talk about that, is the idea that maybe to go back to this concept of the human right, maybe some groups have more of a human right than others. So this idea of deservedness is something that we start emerging, and we see it with those different groups. So again, a tidbit of history. 50 years ago, so it was in February 22nd, 1974, in Manitoba, the launch of the first pilot project around basic income. It was called MINCOME, and it lasted for up until 79. Interestingly enough, it lasted until a change of government at both provincial and federal level. And at that time, we always talk about evidence, and I think it's really important to have evidence, but at that time, both levels of government said they had boxes and boxes of information about what had happened. And at that time, both levels of government said, one said, we don't want to know because we don't want to do it, and so we don't want to know if it was successful. And then the other level of government said, we don't want to know because we spent so much money, and what if it was not successful? So they shoved the evidence in boxes so that we wouldn't know, at least for a while. So it's just interesting, but I'm going ahead of myself. So seniors, what was happening in the 70s is in Canada, the rate of poverty among seniors was one of almost the highest in all the Western countries. And people were feeling that seniors, that's not really fair that so many seniors would face poverty. So what if we introduced a new policy? to see if we could, if that could create a difference. And so the guaranteed income supplement for seniors was introduced then. And that very quickly showed that it was actually quite successful in reducing significantly the rate of poverty among seniors. Not eliminating it, but significantly reducing it. So since then, we have gathered a lot of information about basic income, and we've seen that it can be successful. And so 2016, a new benefit is introduced. This time, so again, we said seniors, they shouldn't live in poverty. And then we're looking at children. There's a feeling that children, it's not their fault, so they shouldn't live in poverty. So 2016, we introduced the child benefit, the Canada Child Benefit. Again, it had an impact on the rates of poverty among families that were living in deep poverty. Now, there could be lots of discussions about the rate because so many families get it. So there's discussion around, again, proof that maybe the rate should be higher and, it shouldn't go to as many families because I think families that get up to 200,000 can still get an element of the child benefit. But anyways, we still see that it can lift families out of poverty. And now, just recently, people with disabilities. So in last year, in July, the federal government endorsed the idea of implementing a benefit for people with disabilities. We don't yet know what it's going to look like, but it's in the works. And again, this idea that people with disabilities may experience more challenges in getting access to a job. So again, that idea of deservedness comes in.
And yeah, this is just everyone deserves food and shelter. I think we can all agree on that. But there is this idea that these groups are more deserving than others. But we would like to challenge that. So 1 in 5, this is more research from Proof, 1 in 5 single working age adults with no dependents, or 22%, or sorry, actually this isn't from Proof, but I'll continue, or 22% live below the poverty line, and they make up half of the 1.8 million Canadians living in deep poverty. So this group, not seen as deserving. Because they, are expected to work, we expect them to be able to take care of themselves, earn a living, and that has left them to struggle in poverty. Oops. Where's am I missing some of this? Yeah, so decoupling income, were you gonna?
Yeah, so I think what's important to understand about basic income is that it is a radical idea. And by radical, I mean, like when you look at the root of the idea, what it does is that it takes away the idea that you can only get an income if you're working. It's saying everybody deserves, an income up to a certain, income floor, but it's that piece around basic income that is really transformative. And I think it's really important to understand that. It's also the reason why for some people that's just something they can't go for. Because, we still hold on to this idea that you have to work hard to be able to meet your basic needs. But really, basic income is the mechanism to implement this idea that we all have human rights and we should have our basic needs met regardless of what happens, regardless of what situation we are facing. But it is, we are seeing some movement into it, but I worry that we are at a time where stories are starting to change, and new stories that would be more like reinforcing neoliberalism coming about. So, I just worry about that, but I feel that this is the piece we can't lose, this idea that we have to remove income from work.
So basic income guarantee is what we would propose as a major solution to this problem. basic income, for those who don't know, is a cash transfer from the government, ideally the federal government, so that all Canadians would have access to this. And it would enable everyone to meet their basic needs, participate in society, and live with dignity, regardless of what their work status is. And so something that's really important to me, as Joëlle knows, this is kind of the, like, my little issue that I have with how this is discussed all the time, is that there are different models of basic income that often just get kind of collapsed into each other and people don't really understand the distinctions. So what we generally advocate for, and I think most Canadian advocates prefer, is the basic income guarantee, or often called the guaranteed livable income, but it's the negative income tax model. So basically that means instead of you paying tax, you get money from the government. And a basic income guarantee would be income tested. So you would only get it if your income was below a certain level. It wouldn't go to everyone, which is the difference with the demo grant, or the UBI, which is a very popular term. Everybody throws UBI, Universal Basic Income, around as like a way of talking about all basic income programs, but it's not the umbrella term, it's a specific thing. And so the demo grant applies to everyone, like literally everyone. Income status doesn't matter. Even the rich would receive a UBI, but so the amount would be identical. And there are programs that work like this. I think the Freedom Dividend in Alaska works like this. And so everybody gets the same amount, which means that if we were going to offer it for all Canadians, that amount, if it were going to be sufficient for those who need it most, would probably be like astronomically high. Like prohibitively like costly. Like we just wouldn't do it. So this is a big part of why Canadian advocates prefer the basic income guarantee or guaranteed livable income model. That would be, income tested. Only the people who need it get it. It's not a thing that everyone gets. I like to draw the comparison to like equality versus equity. So to me, UBI is like the equality model where everyone gets exactly the same thing, and that's supposed to be good somehow. But equity, like a more equitable solution, is to give people what they need, right? And so, yeah, again, we're very much for the negative income tax model. That's always been our preference. There are movements for UBI. There's like UBI Works is a big organization in Canada, but I would say the majority of people that are fighting for this are after the big.
And all the systems we have in place for seniors and children is based on this negative income tax.
Yes, we have a lot of evidence in Canada for the negative income tax model. Like you were saying, not old age security, the other one, guaranteed income supplement, and Canada Child Benefit both work the way that a basic income guarantee would. Did you want to say a little bit more about
MINCOM?
MINCOM?
So MINCOM in Manitoba, I said, they shove the information in boxes, thousands of boxes. This woman, that's Dr. Evelyn Forger. She's a health economist, and she's from Manitoba. And she heard about the initiative when it started. And in 2000, she said, I wonder what happened in terms of where was the evidence? And so she found the boxes just about when they were going to be destroyed. Like the timing, it was just incredible. And she looked at boxes after boxes. She has not actually finished looking at all of them, but she published an article called "The Town with No Poverty." We invited her. She came to Peterborough a few times to talk about her research. And it was, I think, the title that she had, "The Town with No Poverty," kind of galvanized more interest because people had completely forgotten the idea that, we could actually eradicate poverty. Mm-hmm. We talk, even here, we've had a poverty reduction network. Let's make it just a little bit less painful. But no, I think we can find ways to actually transform the situation. And so Evelyn really rekindled the conversation around basic income, and since then there's been a lot of activism around basic income.
Mm-hmm. So some of that activism was done by someone named Jessie Golem, who you may have heard of in her Humans of Basic Income photography project, which was in response to the Ontario Basic Income pilot project's cancellation. So she lives in Hamilton still, and is an artist, a photographer, a pianist, a number of things. And she was a recipient of the Ontario Basic Income pilot. And so it was just such a shock to have that, what was supposed to be a 3-year project, just cut down to 18 months. And just like the floor ripped out from under 4,000 people, including Jessie. So she channeled that rage into this project, and I will just quickly read these. Somehow I managed to like not print the other half of my notes, but I'm gonna just read this off the screen. Basic income means I can pay my guide dog's medical bills. ODSP does not have a drug plan for service animals. $250 a month for meds, never mind vet costs. The option was to give her back and the school would adopt her out. Basic Income Pilot Project has allowed me to keep her and my independence. And this is, I'll just do one more. When I was on basic income, I had enough money to buy groceries and still have money left over. I didn't have enough money to survive when I was on ODSP. I just wanted to have enough money to afford food and have extra to save. Hashtag promise made, promise broken, which refers to the fact that every single party during that election promised that they would let the pilot run, and our current government decided that that was not what they wanted to do, so that's the promise broken. So principles, do you want to go over these or should I? Yeah? Okay. So we like to talk about what the basic income we want actually looks like. We talk a lot about imagination and picturing what we're after. So these are 4 principles of many other principles that get batted around, but these are the ones we've kind of prioritized for today. So adequacy, so enough to actually cover your basic needs, and index to inflation, so that when those basic needs become more expensive, people can still afford them. And then accessibility, so should be available to all Canadians, but again, it should be income tested. And yeah, all Canadians, permanent residents and protected persons when needed, and be paid out reliably and efficiently. Dignity is a huge one, because so many of our social assistance programs are not dignified, they're punitive. So it should be payable to individuals to be used at their sole discretion, free of stigma and oversight. There's a lot of policing that happens in the social assistance system that is not helpful. And then complementary is another piece. So it should work in tandem with other social services, other policies, like rent controls are a major thing that needs to exist as well. Sometimes people think that let's put in a basic income and forget about everything else, and that's not what anyone is proposing. And essentially, like this, like a key piece of that is that it shouldn't leave anyone worse off, and that was a principle in the Ontario Basic Income Pilot Project as well, because sometimes when you get off social assistance, all of a sudden you don't have your benefits anymore, and so there's a big drop off. Like it's not just a smooth off ramp off of social assistance. You lose your social assistance money, you lose all those benefits, like your dental benefits, all the like prescription benefits, you lose everything. So this should all work in tandem together. And some things we can collapse into a basic income. Maybe OWODSP get collapsed in, but other things we would keep. So again, complementary.
I had the opportunity to speak with Ron Henkel, who was the manager of the Mincome project. We invited him to come to Peterborough. And what was interesting in what he said that what he discovered is that it was not just the fact that people were getting more income. It was the fact that it stabilized their lives. They knew that months after months, this income would be there for them. And so that is one piece that people don't really pay attention enough to, is how poverty is generating so many crises one after the other. And people, like there's been actually some studies done around brain when you are living on low income all the time. And you can't concentrate, it's like trying to get a job. Like it's just impossible. So what basic income does is that it provides us stability and helps people then be able to envision, what they want to do in their with their lives.
Just building on that, some of the most interesting things about precarious work research that I've seen is that even people who are making like a decent wage, if their job is precarious, their mental health is impacted dramatically. So like, even if you can like comfortably pay all your bills, if you don't have that stability to know that like a year from now I can pay all my bills, that has an impact, like a really serious impact. The struggle is real. There's a lot of people dealing with these problems, and it's devastating trying to work within a system where you just can't build anything. You can't, you don't know where your next meal is coming from. You don't know how you're going to pay your rent. You don't know, even if you're fairly financially okay in the moment, like how many paychecks before you aren't, And so we're trying to imagine something better with a basic income. We are trying to talk about what happens when a society does support the right to living. If we can kind of I don't want to use the word enforce, but how did you put it? Or like activate, or I forget how you put it, but
Actualize.
Actualize, yes. So if we were to actualize our right to living with a basic income guarantee, things like care work would be valued and supported. So I'm sure many of you are parents, or maybe you take care of someone in your life who needs more support and can't support themselves. Like that work would be valued, and you would have the kind of mental space to do it. Same with volunteering. We would give people capacity to actually volunteer. I know so many people, like, go back to Jackie here. Jackie is volunteering all the time. Sorry to pick on you, or highlight you really. But it's not always paid, right? Like that work is important, and we need that. And nonprofits desperately need their volunteers, sadly. So much is downloaded onto the nonprofit sector, and there aren't enough people to make it work. And so providing that capacity makes a big difference. Same with the arts. I know there's artists in the room. I myself am an artist. We would have the time, the energy, the resources to commit to that artistic labor, and it is labor. And then democracy. I know Joëlle is probably going to expand on this piece, but everyone would be able to participate fully. And that's just something, like, I just want to let that sit for a minute. Like, imagine a world where you have the mental energy and space to think about social justice and do that work, right? Like, go to demonstrations that are happening in the middle of the day when normally you're at work all day. Like, it opens up so much possibility. And I think that's part of why politicians are afraid of it, right? Like, you have the free time to get out and fight.
Yeah, basic income grows democracy, absolutely. And you've said it very well, thank you.
So fight today for a better tomorrow. And reimagine did you want to?
So the one thing that I feel we would need at least one generation with basic income to really see the impact that it would generate. Like, I think we only get the tip, of the iceberg. We don't really have a sense of what would it be like to live in a world where people's human rights are actually actualized. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the revolution that basic income, with other policies, I'm not wanting you to think it's the panacea, but I think that's the revolution that it can usher.
Mm-hmm. And we talk a lot about how it's both revolutionary but also working within the existing system. And there's, I think, a power in that. Because, we're stuck in capitalism right now, and that's where this quote comes from. Ursula K. Le Guin said, "We live in capitalism. Its power seems inescapable, but so did the divine right of kings. Any human power can be resisted and changed by humans." So thank you. I will add, these posters along the front table here all have either actual links or QR codes that you can use your phone camera to access. And two of them are action items. So one of those is to send a template letter that we've prepared to MP Michelle Ferrari. She has stated that one of her main issues is Canada's mental health crisis. Yeah. And so we have a ton of research from proof, again, about food insecurity and its relationship to mental health. And so we've kind of populated a template with all of these facts, and so it's ready to go. You just need to add your name and your address at the bottom, but it'll take you directly into your email. And then there's also a link to write to the Senate. and that will take you to a Lead Now webpage. Both of those are great actions. The Senate currently has, is it Bill S233? It's about how do we do a guaranteed livable income. So if you want to say what that would mean for you, send it there. Those are our 2 action items, but there's also a ton of resources as well, and local organizations at every level, provincial, federal. Check them out on your way out. Thank you.
Thank you all for helping us to reimagine what life could be like if human rights were actually enacted and protected. I'm feeling a little bit lighter, personally, so I hope other people are as well. So there are a number of questions that I had, and so I'm going to start by asking the panel a few questions. I'm going to hog the floor for a while and then turn it over to you if you have some questions as well. So the first one is, could you discuss any myths or misconceptions about the strategies that you have shared for mobilizing for change? So when it comes to tenants' unions or when it comes to basic income?
I can start. I think a myth, I was pondering on this question yesterday, and I think one of the myths that come with grassroots mobilizations or just community organizing in general, it's that it's really just for people who consider themselves activists or even radicals. And I think this is a common misconception because a lot of the most successful campaigns and like community organizings and just these mobilizations comes from the regular people who one day just decided, you know what, just put their foot down and be like, you know what, maybe I don't want to live paycheck to paycheck, or maybe I don't want a landfill or industrial sewage to be spilled in my neighborhood. And it stems from this, individual actions that stem from like years of suffering or injustices, and just takes one person to be like, I want to fight for what's right. You don't have to have prior experience in activism or a necessity or just a passion in that. It comes from a personal desire to fight for what you believe is right, and just for your right and for the people you love. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
From the basic income standpoint, the argument we hear more than anything is like, oh, well, it's going to be a disincentive to work, right? But there's so much evidence that shows otherwise. I can't think of a single experiment that I've seen that they've actually had people just like stop working altogether. There are, like from Mincome, for instance, we know that there were a couple of groups who worked less. And those were parents who wanted to stay at home more. And they were often young men who wanted to go to school instead of going straight to work. And so I would say we can all understand both of those things, and we would say they're good. Like, that's good. We want parents to spend more time with their kids. We want people to get more educated before they enter the workforce. So yeah, we know that that's kind of not really a problem. The other big one I would say is the cost. And it does, I can understand why people think it seems like expensive up front, especially if they're looking at the UBI model and not the basic income guarantee model. But we know how much we're spending on poverty right now. We, just in healthcare alone, if we don't even look at crime and the criminal justice system and how much that costs, just the healthcare piece alone, if you look at food insecurity statistics, there would be, the numbers I've seen just for Ontario would be anywhere from $4 to $12 billion that are just squandered because we're putting people through illness, when if we gave them money up front, they would take care of themselves. They'd feed themselves properly. We wouldn't have that burden on the healthcare system. I hate to use the word burden, but that's how the taxpayer often sees it. So yeah, we would save billions just by implementing this. And so think about that as part of the return on investment. Yes, you're putting out all this money up front, but then it comes back around. Poverty is expensive.
Yeah. Can I add something to that? In my view, and from what I've seen, sometimes basic income allows people to work. It allows people to get clothes for interviews. It allows them to buy the truck they need for their business. It allows them to do all those sorts of things that help them to get stabilized and to move forward.
Yeah, we didn't even talk about entrepreneurship.
And entrepreneurship.
That's a huge piece.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Next question. What have you found to be helpful about talking about these strategies with people who are new to them?
I can go. Yeah, so I think in just our conversation so far, I feel like the best thing that I think we found to do is just to hear people. I think everyone has a story, and you know, when you get a chance to speak with people one-on-one, you know, you get to share, you get to listen, and also, you know, you get to share your perspective. And so I think just approaching those conversations from kind of like a person-to-person level, and really having the opportunity to hear people out is really important. And yeah, if people, you know, are struggling, just to know that there's people in their corner. And in terms of like, you know, I guess an approach or strategy of, I guess, direct action, I think kind of demystifying it a bit is helpful as well. Just kind of like showing people what that looks like. Yeah, kind of showing people the ropes is important. I think, you know, so many people are familiar with protest and demonstration, but I think, yeah, like Irene was mentioning, it can be kind of like out there, I guess. So kind of just personalizing it, getting an opportunity to build relationships with people is important. And yeah, I think if we're talking about like, you know, full rent control or more of these strategies around what are our demands, I think, again, just bringing them into real life, you know, using your own story to help people understand what the issues are.
I just wanted to add on a little bit to that. I think one thing that I've found helpful is kind of bringing this sense of hope back to people, like talking about them, like, look, we're doing this, and they're like so happy, like, oh, it's about time, you know. And I think though rage is really important in organizing and fighting, hope is also key in bringing people out on the streets.
Great,
Yeah.
thank you.
And I would completely pick up on that idea of hope. So I often talk about when doing, you know, kind of work in the community, you have to always think about your hope muscles. Are they getting too low? Like, are they needing a bit more practice? And so for me, basic income has always been like a way to practice my hope muscles. And I feel that that's what I'm seeing also when I talk to people about basic income. It's like we are living in such a complex and draining and really challenging time, and people feel overwhelmed. What can we do? What can be done? It's like ready to give up often. And basic income is like one avenue among many avenues that is very practical. It's not even like we're actually already implementing that kind of policy for many Canadians. So it's not completely out there, you know. And so I feel like it gives people a sense that, yeah, some very concrete things can be done. And that feels reassuring. That feels that not all is lost. We can actually imagine a very different world than what we have.
I would just add that, like, I think every audience you kind of need to appeal to for what works for them. So one of the resources we have here, I'm not sure which poster it's on, is the Ontario Basic Income Network's Case for Basic Income series. So it has arguments from the health perspective, food insecurity, women, the arts, work, finance, municipalities, has all of those things. Because if you're coming from different places, you kind of need to be pulled in from where you're at.
Great, thank you. I'm going to move on to the last question that I had, just because it ties in, and it's what have you learned about some of the best approaches for getting people engaged, and what helps to bring people into movements like basic income and tenant unions? So do you have anything more to say about actually getting people engaged?
I would say it has to be kind of personal.
Yeah.
I think people don't really tune in until it hits them somehow. And so again, like going back to the Case for Basic Income, like you need to find that thing. Like, how do you make it personal for this person? You know, I think it comes down to that. Because we all have this emotional response. Like, we can present evidence and statistics like all we want all day. People aren't going to hear it if they're coming from like an ideology that just, it doesn't fit, right? And so you need to find something that does fit in their world.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I feel that the pandemic and CERB really brought a lot of people on board. They had never imagined, because that's the thing with we have with poverty. People feel like, oh, that's those people, it's never going to happen to me, and so they don't get, so engaged. But with the pandemic, suddenly it transformed everything. And so many people who felt they would never have to deal with that found themselves vulnerable. So it was interesting to see that how this new, the new policy, and it was rolled in so quickly and really made a change for lots of people. Yes, there were issues, but it was not designed as basic income, but there were ideas connected to that. So it's also finding moments like that that you can use and say, hey, did you think about this? And then I often think about what would be the conversation with Uncle Bob? Because I think pretty much everybody has an Uncle Bob, and they're trying to imagine how would I put it with them. So, it's trying to see all those entry points for potential Uncle Bob and see if you could have that conversation. May not always go well, but I think it's always a test to see how you're going to approach the issues.
I feel like everybody's got an Uncle Bob who has had difficult conversations with you.
I think I would just go back to Elisha's point. I was going to reference all the data that I had in my slides, especially in Peterborough, you see all these numbers, but they don't really hit the mark. It's really when you're on the streets talking to people, seeing the real stories and the faces behind those numbers that it really hits you, and it's it rehumanizes them and it rehumanizes you. I think under a capitalist society, we've kind of lost a lot of our morale and our sense of justice. And so I think, politics really is on the streets. It's not really, enclosed in a room with intellectuals. It's really the people on the streets that really have something to say and have experiences day by day. And I think that's what we're trying to tap on today through our tenancy unions.
Yeah, for sure. I feel like I can only just expand on that. I think just letting people know that we exist and that we are a community of folks who all, have a lot of rage towards the system, all are facing our own struggles within the system, and knowing that there is this avenue to advocate for change and that you don't have to do it alone. I think just knowing that can be really empowering. So I'll leave it there.
Yeah, thank you all. We don't have much time at all. I don't know if we've got any time, but I did want to open it up for just a question or two if people have any burning questions. Yes. And do we need a microphone back there? No.
I'm curious whether there's been any research to determine, if we simplified the system overall, what would be the savings from a federal government, bureaucracy situation? Has anybody looked at that? Because basically a basic income would, I'm assuming if we did it correctly, would then reduce sort of so many different programs all across the board in different places, different provinces, etc. And if it was just sort of a more equalized system, how could we reduce government costs? Because I think everybody's going to argue that it's too expensive, but I think, I wrote down what you said, poverty is expensive, because it is. So how do we prove?
One of these links here actually goes to a costing that was done of a basic income and a few different models. So if you want to have a look at that, it is a lot of detail, but it breaks it down. And I think I think it's 3 different versions of a basic income and how much they would cost and where the savings would be. And it really analyzes the heck out of that. So I would recommend checking that link out here.
And that was done by the Basic Income Canada Network.
Yes.
So I pointed out to Evelyn Forget. She's done extensive work around that. And I don't know if you are from Peterborough, but her books are at the library. So if you are interested, and she also has written articles that are shorter, where she talks about that exact topic.
Great, thank you. And one more question, Alex?
I talk a lot though. Does anyone else have another question?
I would just like to say with the tenants union, come on out, because I've been passionate about that stuff. but it was nice to have people who had other issues or experiences come out, so less alone, and then they got information. I think they felt the same way.
Great, thank you.
Sunday.
See Chelsea back there.
I just kind of wanted to comment on something I've seen that was a literal follow through of what you were asking. So Lindsay was one of the communities that was included in the pilot for basic income, and I used to be a bail worker in Lindsay, so tons of clients there, and some of them that were on basic income that it was tragic when it got cut off, but they had left the court system because of their income. They had no reason to continue the survival crime because they had the money now.
Right.
And then so much independence and autonomy, and it was devastating when it stopped because almost every single one of those people were back in the court system within 3 months. So even court cost money and bringing people out of the system is unbelievable if you have basic income, because a lot of the crime, especially in our community, is survival crime.
I can say one thing.
People are okay?
Yeah, so I love that everyone was 10 out of 10, and I love the framing of basic income with the child benefit and the seniors and the people with disabilities. That's a huge argument for it to say, hey, no, it's actually already happening in this way, and that's amazing. And I love the talk about CERB. My artist friends in Toronto and musicians were able to do some of the most amazing advocacy by having the security of what CERB offered them. I think the fear from the guaranteed basic income, I think I said it right, maybe it switched around, but the fear is that the government of the day will use it to take away other social programs and services and health programs. And so how do we advocate for whatever the acronym is at this point, and also sustain things that are also vital, right?
So that's why we've been really advocating for the kind of basic income we want.
Yeah.
It's not this libertarian approach where, let's get this policy and then just eliminate everything else. It's really one core policy to really raise the income floor and then support people with the other policies. So I think it's really important to keep on talking about that. Yes, governments always want to find ways through things, but also that's why I think that finding opportunities for people to participate, and I mentioned that basic income can grow democracy, and we need that because we need people's voices at the table saying, no, you can't do that. And so that I think that's part of it, but there is no full assurance. I think we've been very clear as to the kind of basic income we want, and keep on repeating that. But yes.
And I've always been so interested in Peterborough's history as a testing ground. We used to get the big extra and all the stuff from McDonald's as a testing ground when I was growing up. I don't know who remembers that, ketchup, chips and stuff.
National Test Market.
Test town. And so I always thought that would be a great approach to do for basic income, right? In terms of a direction, right? In terms of a direction.
Yeah. The thing is that this was a provincially run pilot. There was no federal support. And so we knew that Peterborough was too large, to do what Lindsay did. Lindsay had 2,000, residents participating. We knew that Peterborough was too big to do that because of this just provincial initiative.
All right. Well, thank you all so much. Thank you. This is amazing. Thank you all. Please come up and sign petitions.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Research for Social Change Lab podcast. To stay up to date with our latest episodes, be sure to follow us on Apple Music, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information on the Research for Social Change Lab's activities, including past, present, and future projects, visit socialchangelab.ca.